I had grown up watching The Omen and really loved it. And just not only The Omen, but all of classic 70s horror films have a really particular place in my heart. And so when this came about, we wanted it aesthetically to tap into that nostalgia. Um, but we also wanted to tackle it with more contemporary issues so that it would speak to people modern day. And that's what I loved about the 70s, is that they were such irreverent filmmaking that really isn't afraid to talk about what's happening culturally. And so just looking at, The Exorcist, Rosemary's Baby, The Omen, like people are very frightened of their kids, and you think about that in the time of the Cultural Revolution that was happening at that time. And so we had to really stop and think about what was happening around us, and how we were going to translate that into the Omen franchise and earn our place. Our life is so intertwined with our work, and so we're kind of constantly talking about ideas and concepts, and so when this project came about, going back and forth about what was really hitting us, what was scaring us, and Tim said, the scariest thing to me is what's not on the page here, which is when she is at the disco and then she wakes up. And he said, this blank area is what I'm really interested in. And that started this conversation about female body horror and how to ground that. It's not too hard to ground that for me, especially nowadays. And so when you think about The Omen, just as a concept, it's about the birth of Damien. It's about birth. So it was very natural to have everything, all the set pieces, all the themes stem in that idea. So looking at the entire script through that lens and how we could reshape certain moments to really highlight that was mostly the conversations we were having. COVID was an interesting time. We pitched this during COVID, and everything stopped. And for the first time ever since I started working to be a filmmaker, I had a moment to stop and recalibrate. And Tim and I had a lot of conversations about, obviously you work in film, you want jobs, you want to be wanted for those jobs. So sometimes you have to bend what interests you and who you present as. And for the first time we said, let's just present ourselves. Let's save everybody the time. If we're not right for the project, we're not right for the project, but let's go straight to the issue. And he said, what is one image of the movie that you think encapsulates the entire theme of the project? And I said, it's a full frontal vagina shot with a hand coming out of it. And he was like, okay, we're going to pitch that. And it's COVID, so you have that Brady Bunch Zoom, right? And we were in New Orleans and our internet wasn't great. And they said, so what's your concept? And I said, well, I really want to present this idea. This is about, the female body and the horrors that the female body goes through. And I really want this image to be the anchor of the film. And so I said, it's going to be a full frontal vagina shot, close up. And the internet froze. And so I sat there, I was like, oh my God, it froze at the worst moment. Tim, let's get our references ready. Let's get all of our images ready. And we heard, no, don't do that. We're all here still. We heard you. And they all kind of thought about it and they said, okay. Which is kind of really amazing. Like, never underestimate Hollywood. I have all these concepts about what people want in Hollywood, and you just never know. It was great because, we have these preview screenings where it's the first time you show an audience, and you just don't know how they're going to react, and it's probably the most nervous I've ever been in my entire life. And there was this boy in front of me. I got to sit in the middle of the audience, and there was this boy in front of me, and he had this giant bag of M&Ms, and he was just like there was no tomorrow, just shoving the M&Ms in his mouth. And then that shot came up, and his mouth dropped, and all these M&Ms fell out. And I was just thinking, like, yeah, let's go, When it came to the horror of the film, initially you think of the devil, right? I don't find the devil to be a particularly frightening character for modern audiences anymore. He's a bit more of a caricature, I feel like. But the real life horror of the situation is something that a lot of people are going through right now, and I think it can be terrifying to be, exploring this world in a female body. And I think whether you're male or female, feeling that people are preying upon your body is a very relatable feeling. So for all of these set pieces, it was important to remind people that they are in a body that's made of flesh and blood that can feel pain, and to try and elicit empathy that way. So in all of the set pieces, it was really important for us in the sound design to have human breath. So during the birth scene, you'll hear just the woman on the table's breath, and you'll hear just Margaret's breath. Our sound design also starts to bleed into our score and vice versa, because a lot of our score, which was created by Mark Corbin, is vocals and female breath and female screaming. And so those lines really start to blur. Voices and breath started to just feel that, I think, something that was very natural and everybody started to pick up on. We got to shoot in Rome, which is really special, because you're living both in the past and the present when you're in Rome, and there's so many ghosts around you, and it's so echoey. So it created this feeling of hearing just like of, all of these different lives. And that created this sense of paranoia, but also this feeling of you were amidst a Greek choir. And that was something I tried to articulate, but really I just started breathing in people's faces. I was just like, and, I played a lot of breath work on set that confused the whole crew. And, but it ended up in this really interesting amalgamation of music and sound design. This movie is about Margaret not knowing what's real and what's not real, what's memory, what's trauma, what's supernatural. A lot of things are coming from the darkness, So when we were shooting this, we wanted to play with this line of having information in the dark that you can't see. And a lot of that is a lot of the horrors through the sound design. So if you can be in a theater and you can have hear the Atmos mix, and hear voices coming from behind you, or through these dark places, that's intend to really ratchet up the paranoia. And I think the scariest thing is being able to hear something and not see it. And there's a particular scene where you aren't sure if you're seeing something or if your eyes are playing tricks on you, and it's designed that way, which was really fun. It's one of my favorite scenes. But yeah, it was really inspired by Bresson's A Man Escapes. There's so much action that happens just through the sound design, which was really inspiring. A huge inspiration for this film was Carl Dreyer's Vampire. What was so unnerving about that horror film, I think, is the use of perspective, not necessarily gore or jump scares, but not knowing whose perspective you were in at certain times. And also, that film starts with a card that says, like, this man's a dreamer and he seeks out the supernatural. So immediately you think, like, I don't know if I can trust this person's point of view. And then to be presented with these kind of uncanny, eerie, disturbing, unnerving images that you don't know if they're in real life or not, that had this cumulative effect that really upset me, strangely enough, more so than I think, audiences are quite jaded to gore. And I'm a bloodthirsty audience member, I'm with them. But this affected me in a way that I wasn't expecting, and that was a huge inspiration for the First Omen to let's have an incremental ratcheting up, turning of the screw, that becomes physical at a certain point. I think that it's only a matter of years before horror bridges into prestige. I think that already some of the best work in the industry is being done in the horror genre, and I think that Get Out showed us that, Hereditary showed us that, Babadook showed us that, and to have the Academy Awards recognize Get Out is huge, I think, because horror is an interesting genre. We're talking about things that nobody wants to talk about outright. It's I come from photojournalism, and horror was a very seamless transition for me because it is you're you're expressing the fears of the masses, and I love the term that Jordan Peele came up with socio horror. So I believe that that's going to get more and more recognition as people understand how important the conversations that horror genre is creating are. I think that it brings empathy into the conversation, because being afraid in a theater with a group of people is really fun, and I think it frees your heart open a little bit. I think it's also really important, just to the theatrical experience that horror exists, because people want to be in a theater and feeling the energy. And I think that if we keep independent theaters alive, we keep democracy alive. Just going to say that. Big statement to say, but I'm going to say it. So yeah, I think it's really, I'm a big horror fan, clearly.